With the increasing number of missiles coming to War Thunder, I decided to rank them against each other so that you know how they stack up and what to use. There will be timestamps in the videos so that you can skip to your favorite nations, and with that out of the way, let's get into the video. The AIM-9B is the first missile that most people get, so it's not gonna rank very high obviously. It only pulls 10 Gs, and it has a cage seeker, meaning you can't really lead the missile at all. That being said though, it's seen at really low BRs, so when we get to its clones, I'll put it above them. Still, it's gotta go into the F tier. The AIM-9E is an upgraded version of the AIM-9B built by the United States Air Force. It has an uncaged seeker, and it has a redesigned cone, so it can go a little bit faster, but it still has that 10 G maneuver limit. Regardless, I'm going to put it in the D tier, as I think the slight upgrades that it gets puts it ever so slightly above the AIM-9B. The AIM-9J is just an AIM-9E, but with 20 G of pull instead. The problem is that at the higher BR it sits at, the dead time it has at the beginning of its launch really holds it back. And it doesn't have a very large gimbal limit either, so you can't lead the missile very far. So it's really honestly quite mid, and I'm gonna have to put it in C tier. The AIM-9P is essentially, at least in War Thunder, just an export copy of the AIM-9J. I'm gonna put it in the same tier. This may be a hot take, but the AIM-9D as it is now, I think is better than the AIM-9J. Even with a cage seeker, you have basically twice the burn time, giving it much more range, and even though it technically has 2 G less of pull, it goes a little bit slower, so it's going to be cutting turns a little bit tighter, putting it in the same places that the AIM-9J will go. But with the much increased range that Navy missiles have in general, I'd honestly rather use it over the AIM-9J. Top of C tier. The AIM-9G is a well above average missile. It takes everything the AIM-9D had, and then gives it, like, one of the largest gimbal limits I've ever seen. You can lead this thing so far, letting it hit shots that the AIM-9D otherwise wouldn't hit. And you still have the really good range, so I'm gonna have to put it in B tier. The AIM-9H is just an improved AIM-9G. It has digital internals, if I remember it correctly, and it has an improved track rate, but barely anybody even know what that does in War Thunder, and you really can't notice the effect. So even though it's technically an improvement, you don't really feel any difference in War Thunder. Regardless, I'll put it above the AIM-9G just in case there's like that 0.001% chance scenario that it actually does something different. The AIM-9L is amazing. Take all of the strengths that the Navy missiles have, the 9H, G, and D, and then throw it on a 30G all-aspect missile. This is an easy S tier. Also, it has the best flare resistance in the game, I'm pretty sure, which is a pretty big bonus going for it. Honestly, I forgot about the AIM-9B FGW2 when I was making this list. It has a red image on the tier list because I don't own the one aircraft that it's on. If I remember correctly, it's an improved seeker on an AIM-9B. I guess it might have more flare resistance, so I'll put it above it, but it's still just an AIM-9B. The R3S is the copy of the AIM-9B that the Soviets made. It's basically identical. I actually don't know what differences they have. I'm gonna put it in the same tier as it. The R13M1 is like an AIM-9J, but with a little bit of extra burn time. This gives it a bit of an edge over the AIM-9J, which is its counterpart, and is honestly enough for me to put it in the B tier. The R60 pulls very hard and nearly instantly off the rails. This earns it a reputation as a dogfight missile, as you can shoot it from extremely close ranges. Unfortunately though, it's extremely flare hungry, and doesn't have very much range, though I think I'd still take it over the AIM-9J. I'm gonna put it in C tier. You know everything I just said about the R60? Well, give it much more flare resistance due to the fact that the R60M is all aspect. It's an entirely different monster on its own, and it's gonna earn its spot in the A tier. The R60MK is just the export designation of the R60. I'm gonna put it in the exact same spot. Honestly, I don't have much experience with the R23T. It has 20G of pull, so I guess I'd take it over an AIM-9J with its extended range, but this is one of the placements that I'm the least sure about. The R24T is very good. It pulls hard, and it has good range, and it has a relatively okay level of flare resistance. This would be my number one if it didn't just get a nerf this patch, but it's still gonna earn its spot in the S tier. You know, you would think the R27T is better, but as it stands right now, it can get one flared because its flare resistance is bugged right now. It should have really good flare resistance, but instead Gaijin gave it none at all, so it'll go for the first flare it sees. Regardless, it pulls hard and has really long range, letting you snipe people from really far away. It's still gonna earn its spot in the A tier. I'm gonna be real with you, I've never played an aircraft that has the Firestreak. I guess it has 15G of pull on an uncaged Seeker, so it's better than the AIM-9E, but also it seems like it's pretty heavy. I don't know, I'll just put it above the AIM-9E. You wouldn't think the red top is that great, considering it's a bomber hunting missile, but it has a pretty large explosive filler and maneuvers decently well. If you don't know how to avoid a missile, this thing will still hit you, and with that, I'll put it above the Firestreak in D tier. Oh, the SRAAM, how the mighty have fallen. I would put this at a much higher placement if this was back when the Harrier was fighting Sabres, but at this point, it gets one flared by literally everything and only has like 1 kilometer effective range. You can technically take head-ons with it, but objectively, it really isn't a great missile. I'm gonna put it in D tier as well. I'm sorry, Brits. The PL2 is just a copy of the R3S. Going down there with it. A lot of you who haven't used the PL5B before might be surprised by this placement, as it's still a rear aspect missile, but it's gotta go in the A tier. It has a really short burn time, but it burns extremely hard, giving it really long range, but also it's not spotted for very long. This lets you hit some 30G maneuver long range snipe shots that like literally no other missile except for maybe the AIM-9L can hit. It's not all aspect though, so I'm gonna put it in the top of A tier. The PL7 is just a copy of the Magic 1. I'm gonna put it in B tier because it still has 35G maneuverability and can burn through flares somewhat consistently, but only a couple. It isn't all aspect though, so top of B tier. I'm gonna reiterate this for anybody who just skipped to France. The Magic 1 has 35G maneuverability, and it can burn through a couple of flares, but it isn't all aspect, so it can really struggle with its short range sometimes. But it's still a pretty good missile. I'm gonna put it top of B tier. The Magic 2 is very good. It has the same flare resistance as the AIM-9L, which is like the best in the game, but you're kinda limited by your basically 2-second arm time on your proxy fuse, so you can't really use it in head-ons. Though it is basically a guaranteed kill if you can shoot this thing rear aspect. It's going in the S tier. The R530E is a goofy-aw missile, if you will. It basically dogfights the person you're shooting at, as it's fairly slow, so it'll take a bit to get to your opponent, but it also burns for a while. It's really confusing. I want it to be a good missile, and it's pretty funny to use, but I'd say, objectively, it maybe isn't the greatest. It's gonna go in the D tier, but I still recommend taking it out on anything you can. Hello Sweden players, all of your missiles are copies. The RB-24 is just an AIM-9B. The RB-24J is just an AIM-9P, which is a copy of the AIM-9J. And the RB-74 is an AIM-9L. There are all your placements. You can go back to the US if you want to hear my full explanations on them. Israel, despite only having 2 missiles, actually has some pretty good ones. They're absolute bangers. The Shafrir is an 11G missile. I know, huge. A lot of us boys in the War Thunder community know how much an extra 1 can count. I'm still putting it in the F tier because it's, you know, not that big of a step up. But hey, it's at least 1G better than the AIM-9B. The Shafrir 2 is like if you took an AIM-9G and gave it a little bit less gimbal limit and a little bit less range. It doesn't have as much versatility, and it can't be radar slaved, which actually kind of matters sometimes in the AIM-9G, but regardless, it's still a very good missile. I'm gonna put it at the back of B tier. Well, that's everything. If you disagree with me, all of my tier lists are on tiermaker.com, so you can head into the Discord server and drop your own. Also, I'll get around to making a radar version of this tier list eventually, though I tried to spread out my tier list videos a little bit so that I can at least mix up my content. Other than that, that's all for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Remember to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.